Hey everybody, this is my thoughts on the open beta for Skull and Bones. I actually didn't think we were ever going to see this game released, but no, it comes out later this week actually. This follows a very long period of development hell. It was initially started pretty much right after Assassin's Creed 4, although it eventually spun off into its own thing, which they officially announced in 2017, and then it became vaporware for the next several years, until finally last year they announced that it was going to be releasing in February of this year, specifically February 16th. And as I'm recording this video, that is Friday. And even putting aside the roughly decade of development hell on this thing, Ubisoft just can't help themselves from stirring up some degree of controversy around their games. And in this particular case, it's their CEO, Yves Guillemot, saying that the game is totally worth the $70 asking price because it is a quadruple A game. Which is really funny to think about, because we only use the terms AA and AAA to refer to the size of a game studio along with its associated budget for developing a game. It has absolutely nothing to do with the game's quality. And here Yves Guillemot is saying that this game is somehow quadruple A, which implies that the budget has gone so completely out of control and they've had to have so many people working on it that there is no conceivable way that it would actually be any good. Oh, the joys of Ubisoft execs and their hilarious delusions. But anyway, point is that Skull and Bones has been in development hell for about a decade now. Over the course of that decade, 11 of Ubisoft's studios have been working on it. Its release date has been continually pushed back, something like 8 or 9 times since they first announced it. And as the costs have kept rising and the delays kept piling on, pretty much everybody was like, why didn't they just cancel it? Because it clearly has something fundamentally wrong this entire time. It was horribly mismanaged. They should have canceled it. Well, here's the trick there. They couldn't. Because some of the game's funding was secured from the Singaporean government, and one of the conditions of that is that they were obligated to release it. And so while any sane publisher would just say, okay, this is not working, we're going to cancel this project and allocate these teams to other projects so we can actually get some stuff done, they were just stuck with this albatross around their neck, and they had to do something with it. So what we end up with is what you see on the screen right now. Skull and Bones, a multiplayer action game set during a fictionalized version of the golden age of piracy, so the 17th century. What you'll be seeing throughout this video is the PC version, although it will be available on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, and apparently Amazon Luna as well. Because clearly a multiplayer action game is such a great choice for cloud-based streaming. Anyway, the ultimate question here is whether I think this game is going to be worth picking up. And now that I've rambled for a bit, I feel like it's best if I just go ahead and start delving right into it. So we're going to go ahead and start with presentation and performance, because those are the first things that I noticed, and I already started running into problems immediately. So the first thing to mention is that this runs on the Anvil engine, which Ubisoft has been using for most of their games for a while now, and in terms of graphics, it looks a lot like many of those other games. Modeling solid, texture quality is decent, it's got some decent special effects going on. They do implement a few ray tracing options in here, but I didn't really notice much of a difference with them enabled other than the fact that it reduced my frame rate by about 10 frames. And in a very general sense, the game runs pretty decently. For context, I'm running a Ryzen 9 5900X, 64 gigs of RAM, and an RTX 3080 12GB model, and I game at 1080p because that's what my monitor's resolution is. And with the graphics settings maxed out, I was getting roughly 80-ish frames per second most of the time, although it did have fairly frequent drops down into the 60 and below range. Pretty much what we expect from Ubisoft open-world games built on the Anvil engine at this point. Although on the positive side, I didn't really run into any major glitches or anything, other than just some disconnecting problems, but that's not a problem with the game as much as it's a problem with the servers. So I'm certainly not going to include that in engine problems or anything like that. But once you get past the raw visual fidelity and performance aspect, there's the aesthetic to talk about, and much like with most of Ubisoft's games over the years at this point, the art team has actually done a really good job of replicating what we expect from the age of piracy. At least with regards to pirates in pop culture. So movies, TV shows, that sort of thing. They've done a very good job of replicating that, and they definitely deserve praise for that. Likewise, the environment teams have done a rather good job with putting together environments that look quite nice and definitely fit in with the pirate aesthetic, although unfortunately there's not really anything all that impressive to look at. Then you move over into sound design and things are mostly solid there as well. You've got some decent gun and explosion sounds, nothing particularly impressive, but decent nonetheless. The voice acting is very much middle of the road, nothing particularly good, but nothing particularly bad either. There's not really anything that stands out about it. And the music is, well, it's not terrible, but it's unfortunately not very piratey. A lot of very generic, albeit competent, drum beat style stuff when you're in the middle of combat, and outside of combat, not a whole lot else. So presentation overall is ultimately a bit of a mixed bag, although it leans out more in the solid direction than not. But what about the rest of the game? The gameplay most important, considering this is primarily a multiplayer game, but also story if it even has one. Well, right from the start, it's a bit rough. You see, before you even get a chance to create your character, it throws you through the ship combat tutorial, which is, well, it does give you an idea of what to expect from ship combat, but it is very heavily scripted, let's put it that way. And once you get through the ship combat tutorial, it finally lets you create your character, and right off the bat, it has one of the worst character creation systems I've seen from Ubisoft yet. Now, unfortunately, something went wrong during recording, and I don't have any footage of the character creation to show you here, but in addition to being expectedly limited, where you select a general head shape and then you can customize a few elements of your look with regards to eye color, hairstyle and hair color, scars, makeup, and tattoos, unfortunately, you're really just limited to template options there. It's kind of the same problem that The Division 1 and 2 had. But what makes this one of the absolute worst systems Ubisoft has designed is the user interface for it, because they have it only focusing on your character's face. So if you customize something like the character's body shape or body tattoos, and that changes something that is lower than your character's neck, you can't see what the change is. So you just have to look at the option in the menu and hope it's what you want until you can get to the Vanity Atelier in St. Anne, at which point you are able to completely change the way your character looks, from all the stuff during character creation on up through outfits and so on and so forth. And when you're in the Vanity Atelier, you can see exactly what the changes do. So here's my question to you, Ubisoft. Why the hell didn't you just have the character creation before you even get into the ship combat tutorial and just use the same interface you get for the Vanity Atelier? Because the only two reasons I can think of that you would do something like that are either A, sheer incompetence, and I actually don't think that's the case, and B, you're trying to push people into the Vanity Atelier so then they can see all of the microtransactions that are going to be available in the full release. So then the player might be tempted to spend a few extra bucks on top of their $70 US asking price for the game itself. Oh, and while we're on the topic here, in case you're wondering, the gang's all here. You've got the microtransactions themselves, you've got premium currency, so you're not entirely sure exactly how much money you're spending, and you've got a battle pass with seasonal events, so of course they're going to be trying to push the FOMO. And while the only loot boxes I saw in the entire course of the beta were rewards for quest lines, I wouldn't put past Ubisoft to throw in microtransaction loot boxes as well. Anyway, I've gone off on a monetization tangent when trying to talk about character creation. Your options are very limited. The interface for it is terrible. They should have just used the Vanity Atelier interface and had it be right before you even get into any kind of tutorials at all. But no, of course, they went with an absolutely terrible interface that has a very high chance of you not putting in the options you actually want, and then you worrying that you're stuck with those decisions until you finally get access to the Vanity Atelier. Oh, and speaking of the Vanity Atelier, while I'm on the subject, because there's not actually that much to talk about with it, this is also where you have to go if you want to change your character's outfit. You can't just open a character interface and just do that whenever you want. You have to go to the Vanity Atelier. Which probably sounds like a weird oversight, but the more I think about it, the more I think it's actually intentional for reasons that I'll explain more in a moment. Anyway, character creation is a mess. Once you get past that and you're actually able to go in and customize your character with the Vanity Atelier, you find that a lot of the outfits available to you are really not all that interesting, and a lot of them are just palette swaps of each other, which is definitely not encouraging for the breadth of cosmetics when the full game launches. It gives the impression that when the full game launches, the outfit options are all going to be extremely limited so that they can try to nickel and dime you with cosmetic microtransactions later on down the line. Now that said, none of the outfits or anything like that have any kind of statistics attached to them. It's only cosmetic, So at least that kind of stuff doesn't affect the gameplay. So what about the rest of the gameplay once you get out of character customization? Well, like I said, the first thing they throw you into before you even get to that point is the ship combat tutorial, so let me go ahead and talk about ship combat. As you might expect from a pirate game, there are a variety of ships available to you, although they're basically classified as one of three things. They're either DPS, which is just ships that are designed more to just dish out damage, or they're tanks, which are a bit slower but they can take more punishment, or they're support ships, which will presumably allow you to help out the rest of your party with some additional bonuses. There's also one additional ship type, which is not actually a ship, it's more like a small raft, and that's what you get in the initial tutorial sequence, and you can use it to fish, and that's pretty much it. Now, the first actual ship you're going to get access to is a DPS ship, and it is a rammer. So the idea is that not only can you blast enemy ships with your cannons, you can also ram into them full speed, and that will do quite a bit of damage to them while also not really doing much damage to you. The catch there is that if you ram into an enemy ship head-on, then it will do a lot of damage to you, especially if that other ship is a rammer themselves. And so if you go into a ramming maneuver, then you need to do it either from the side or the back of the enemy ship. And unfortunately, that's about the most interesting thing that ship has going for it, because the rest of ship combat is circling around each other, firing cannons at the big glowy red bits until eventually the enemy ship goes down. Once you do enough damage to an enemy ship, then you'll be given one of two momentary options. One of them is to fire muskets at the enemy ship, which will reduce their health even further, and the other is to launch grappling hooks and board the enemy ship. At this point, you might be thinking, oh, that sounds cool. You hop onto the enemy ship, you do some swashbuckling, you duel the captain, and take over the ship. No, you launch the grappling hooks, it plays an animation of your ship's crew reeling the ship in, and then you get an inventory screen showing you what loot you've got. The only reasons to board an enemy ship are if whatever quest you're on mandates that you do it, or if you just want a bit of extra loot, because that's the only benefit it gives you. And what you find very quickly is that every single ship combat encounter goes exactly the same. You just continue to circle around each other, you shoot at the big red glowy bits until eventually the enemy ship goes down or gets into a position where you can board it, you collect your loot, and you move on. The only thing that spices it up is that sometimes enemy ships will call in reinforcements, and then you might have to either get away from them or try to fight them as well, which can get kind of messy. This is true even when you're going up against bosses. So, for example, you get bounty quests a bit later on after you've done some tutorial stuff, and those have you hunting down boss characters with particularly powerful ships, and the idea there is that you get a party together to go after them because they're big, mean, nasty ships. What you find out immediately is that you actually don't need anybody else to help you out, because the ship combat against boss ships is exactly the same as every other ship. It's just that they can do an awful lot of damage and they have an absolutely massive amount of health, so it turns what's already a pretty tedious slog of combat into an even longer, more tedious slog. And to make matters even more annoying, once you accept the bounty mission, then it starts a timer, and if you don't go take down that boss within the timer, then you fail the bounty quest and you have to go back to the bounty board and pick it up again and start all over. That's annoying enough, but to make matters worse, traversing the environment in this game is an extremely slow, boring, and often kind of irritating process. You see, the kind of naval vessels that are depicted in Skull and Bones aren't exactly the speediest of vehicles to begin with, but since the wind direction changes pretty constantly, you are going to be constantly fighting the wind to get to where you need to go, and that means that you're going to actually be slowing down and speeding up as the wind direction constantly shifts. And as if that weren't enough, you actually can't go at top speed the entire time either, because they implemented a stamina system. The idea is that your crew gets more tired when going at max speed, and eventually you have to give them a rest. But the idea is frankly pretty ludicrous in itself, and in practice it just ends up being an artificial limit on you going as fast as you can to get to where you need to go. At the very least, they could have it so that stamina doesn't drain while not in combat, but of course they don't do that. Instead, they incentivize you getting as many food ingredients as you can to create as many nutritious meals as you can, which will then give you bonuses to stamina efficiency, as well as be able to replenish your stamina. So instead of constantly going full speed, then stopping to rest a bit, what you're probably going to end up doing instead is you're going to consume some food items that increase your stamina efficiency, and then when your stamina starts to get lower, you're going to go into your ship's inventory, you're going to find the food that is only for restoring stamina, you're going to eat that, and then you're just going to keep doing this over and over again until eventually you get to where you need to go. And the especially funny part is you can do the same exact thing during combat as well, so you can basically never run out of stamina as long as you have enough food items. Now you might ask yourself, why would they even bother putting a system like that into the game if it is so stupidly easy to get around? Well, all will become clear here in a moment, so just bear with me. Now, all of the stuff I've mentioned up to this point is rough enough on its own, but then you factor in the leveling system as well as the tier system for the various equipment, and things get dragged out even further, because you realize almost immediately that there is a very heavy grind in this game. It's not just that ship combat is a slog, it's not just that traveling around the world is a slog. It's that they've also thrown in arbitrary leveling mechanics. You have a reputation level, and as you continue to increase that by completing jobs and destroying enemy ships and such, you'll gradually gain access to new cosmetics as well as new items for your ship, whether it be weapons or other furniture that has passive bonuses. You'll gradually gain access to new ship types, and you'll gradually gain access to better and better tools to harvest the materials you need to craft all of the things I just mentioned. Because of course there's a crafting system. Every game these days has to have a crafting system, and of course the crafting system requires you to go find a whole bunch of resources and complete a completely pointless, mind-numbingly boring click when you see the bar go into the green area minigame in order to harvest extra of a particular resource, and then once you've got enough resources, you go back to port, you go to the shop, you find the item or tool or weapon or whatever you want to build, and then you spend the resources along with an amount of silver, which is the game's general currency that you earn by just doing everything, in order to construct that particular thing. And then, if it's a new ship weapon or a ship part, you can put it on your ship. If it's a new tool, then it will make harvesting things a bit easier, or in the case of the crowbars, it will give you access to larger shipwrecks that you can loot. And then you go back to grinding out reputation levels until you get access to more stuff to craft, and you just repeat this process until eventually you've got the maximum level of whatever is available. Thus, rather than introducing interesting challenges to overcome that are more of a matter of skill or anything, it's really just a matter of, oh look, this enemy ship is several levels higher than you, that means it has a ton of health. It's not any more intelligent, it's not any more difficult to fight, it just means that the fight's gonna take a lot longer, so I hope you have enough ammunition to deal with it. And I actually ended up finding this out the hard way, because I got a quest to take down a specific type of enemy ship, and as I was off on an unrelated quest doing something else, I found a ship that was exactly the kind of ship I needed, and so I went in to attack it because it was all by itself, and I found out almost immediately that my ship was barely doing any damage to it at all because it was something like 4 levels higher than my ship was. I started that fight with 289 rounds for my ship's cannons. About 8.5 minutes later, I ended that fight with 65 of them left. It was not a challenging fight in the slightest, and the only times I was actually in danger of losing it were when I accidentally rammed into a ship head-on instead of from the side or the rear, and thus I took damage in addition to them taking damage, and when, after I had already sunk the ship that I was trying to sink in the first place, I decided to make a getaway, and one of the other enemy ships decided to ram into me and did a bunch of damage to me then. There was nothing interesting or challenging about fighting any of these 3 ships. The only thing that made them actually pose even the slightest bit of a threat to me was the fact that their ships were 4 levels higher than mine. And what was even funnier is that when I got away from the enemy ships that were chasing me and were basically right on top of me, I got up to a small island outpost, disembarked, waited the roughly 3 or 4 seconds for it to get rid of the aggro, and then I just hopped back into my ship, and those 2 enemy ships, which were still right there, just left. They didn't care. It's honestly pretty pathetic. So the combat is nothing more than a matter of enemy numbers go up, therefore you need to make your numbers go up to keep up with them. And that both makes the combat incredibly boring and the grind that much more tedious. And so you might be looking to see if there's anything else that might be interesting to do. Well, you can try raiding settlements. At which point you go up to a settlement, you press a button to initiate the raid, and then it plays a brief cutscene of your crew hopping onto the settlement to go raid it. And then you just sail your ship around in circles, blasting the towers that are shooting back at you, until eventually enemy ships show up and you have to take them out, all while a bar fills up at the top of the screen, and as it continues to fill up further, you get more and more loot. And if you're playing a quest that requires you to raid a settlement, you have to complete the entire raid to get to that end of that bar, otherwise you have to start the entire raid over again. During this entire process, you don't get to run into the settlement yourself to do anything. Nope, you're just on the ship, sailing around, shooting at the defenses and enemy ships that come in to try to deal with you, and nothing else. Well, that's really boring, so what else is there? Well, you can hunt for buried treasure, at which point you get a treasure map. It shows you somewhere on the game map, and then you have to go there. And wherever you go will always be a settlement, I might add. It won't be an abandoned island in the middle of nowhere or anything. It's always a settlement. And then I actually found out the hard way that if you don't sight in the settlement and get the information card to come up on the screen that shows you the settlement information, it doesn't count. So you can land at the place knowing exactly where it is and wander around the entire area trying to find the buried treasure prompt, which is a big glowing orange thing, and you will not be able to find it unless you go back into your ship, sail just far enough away to where you can sight the settlement and get the information prompt, at which point your crewman will say, "Hey, Captain, that's where the treasure is," and then you can go back to the settlement and find the prompt for the buried treasure and dig it up. Honestly, it was such a dumb and arbitrary thing that it made me wonder if the developers put it in there as a joke. Anyway, that's all there is to treasure hunting. You just go to wherever the map has an X on it, and then you just find the big glowing orange prompt, and congratulations, you now have treasure. There's no puzzle solving, there's no real thought that goes into it, you just go to where the map tells you to, and then you just get some stuff. So treasure hunting is a bust. What about the rest of the game? What else is there? Well, there's some quests that have you transport some cargo, and some of those involve competing against other players, and those are downright laughable because as long as you play as the ship that has the highest speed, they will not be able to catch up with you, even if they're in the exact same type of ship themselves, because they go the same speed you do, and as long as you maintain your lead on them, they will never catch up to you, so it's a complete joke. There also appears to be some sort of sea monster hunting mechanic, but I didn't mess around with that myself because I just didn't have time to get around to looking into it. But while it has the potential to be the single most interesting thing that is in this game, I highly doubt it'll be much more than the same kind of thing we see with the regular ship combat, except you're fighting a sea monster instead of an enemy ship. And that's pretty much it, actually. You may think to yourself, hey DW, you mentioned story earlier, what about that? Does this game have a compelling story campaign? Haha, no. The story in this game is, you're a pirate, go do piratey things to increase your reputation and eventually become the most nefarious pirate in the Indian Ocean. Along with the other handful of most nefarious pirates in the Indian Ocean that will somehow still be playing this game at that point. Because let's face it, no matter how bad a game is, there are some people who will still keep playing it and will still defend it regardless, and I would feel sorry for those people, but they know exactly what they're doing. And speaking of knowing what they're doing, I need to bring it back to those moments where I said, just wait, I have a point to make with this earlier in the video. In case you were wondering why there are so many annoying things with regards to you having to go onto an island and then go to the shop and talk to the shopkeeper in order to do stuff instead of just having a menu when you dock at that particular settlement if you want to do things quickly, or of course things like how long it takes you to go from point A to point B without using the fast travel system, which costs you silver, I might add, or why everything is locked behind a grind wall including harvesting materials and such. There are basically two reasons for this that I can figure. The first of them is that Ubisoft knew that the game has basically no depth to it, and they tried to hide all of that behind a lot of pointless busy work. It's enough to give you the initial impression that there might actually be something there, but once you look beyond the bare surface level, you realize exactly what you're dealing with, and the illusion shatters immediately. The second reason I can think of is that Skull and Bones is a live service game, which means that the only metric the publisher cares about is how long people keep playing it. The idea there being that the longer someone keeps playing a game, the more likely they are to spend money on microtransactions, battle passes, etc. And thus a reasonable conclusion would be that Ubisoft intentionally put all these time wasters into the game, specifically to waste your time and keep you playing it in the hopes that you will spend more money on all of those things, instead of wising up to the fact that there is nothing on offer here that is actually worth experiencing. It's all just a mindless, tedious, utterly soulless grind fest that is clearly just designed to try to siphon money out of people gullible enough to not only buy the game but buy the microtransactions in the hopes that they'll recoup some of their losses from actually developing this pile of crap. I mean, think about it this way. Skull and Bones is supposed to be a premier quadruple A pirate experience, and yet Assassin's Creed 3 made you feel more like a pirate than this. And no, you did not hear me incorrectly there. I said Assassin's Creed 3, not Assassin's Creed 4. Assassin's Creed 4, you are technically a pirate. Assassin's Creed 3, you're a Native American fighting on the side of the Americans during the American Revolutionary War. And you feel more like a pirate in that than this supposed pirate game Skull and Bones. That is pathetic. And unfortunately, I just know that executives and such are going to look at how this game will inevitably fail and say, oh, well, that means that pirates aren't viable in video games. When the reality is that we've wanted a really good pirate game for a long time. And while we have gotten some fun pirate games over the years like Tropico 2, or of course the Monkey Island series if you're into point-and-click adventure games, or absolute Slav jank like the Sea Dogs series, mainstream developers and publishers have just completely ignored the pirate theme, probably thinking it was non-viable, except for the likes of Assassin's Creed 4 and now Skull and Bones. I guess you can technically consider Sid Meier's Pirates in there, but that game was basically 20 years ago at this point, and it was actually a remake of a game from the 90s, so I don't really think it counts. Anyway, point is that there is plenty of opportunity for a good mainstream AAA pirate game, but they just aren't doing it. They could have literally taken Assassin's Creed 4's general gameplay loop, removed the Assassin's Creed part of it, just made it entirely a pirate game, and honestly, I think most people would actually be really happy with that, and I actually probably would have a good time with that. But instead, they're just giving us this absolute drivel, and it is depressing to think about. So do yourself a favor, if you are looking for a piratey action game, action-adventure game, something along those lines, well, your options are fairly limited, unfortunately, but Assassin's Creed 4 will certainly scratch that itch. And of course, if you can put up with Slav jank, there's always the Sea Dogs series, but your mileage is definitely going to vary on that one. And I might be wrong about Skull and Bones' inevitable failure, but I just hope that the rest of the gaming industry doesn't look at it, see that it's an absolute joke, and then continue to think to themselves that a pirate action-adventure or RPG is somehow non-viable, when the reality is there has definitely been a market for that for a very long time that has just been neglected this entire time. Thank you all very much for watching, and if you like my videos, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon. If you can't afford to or don't want to, that's perfectly fine, I understand, but the option's there if you're interested, and every bit does help. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you all in later videos.